Welcome, everybody. It's nice to see everybody today. I'm Lisa Mangione, your current president, and we have a full agenda. Everybody was chatting away, so yes, we did skip our soft introduction for those that are guests. We typically will start off a meeting giving you something to discuss at your table, but I did not want to interrupt what sounded like lively discussion. And we're going to jump right into it, and B will come up and give our invocation and pledge.
Good afternoon. Heavenly Father, we gather in a spirit of celebration and thanksgiving. We are grateful for the people sitting at our tables, the bounty of food before us, and the chance to be together in hope-filled expectations of your many blessings. When your people gather to eat, fellowship, and enjoy each other's presence, we are reminded that this day that you have made, and because of your faithfulness towards us, we rejoice and are glad in this day. So it is with joyful hearts and a spirit of thanksgiving that we ask you to bless this time and each person here. With one voice together, we say, Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, I'd like to introduce our guests and visiting Rotarians. So when I call your name, please stand and hold your applause till the end because there are several of them. We've got Lisa Goings, guest of the club, Rashidi Green, guest of Scott Stevens, Jenny Joyce, guest of Rude Veltman, Julie Edie, guest of Lisa Mangione, Steve Argo, guest of the club, Marie and Larry Murphy, guest of Jane Dyer, John Dyer, guest of Jane Dyer, Todd Lynn, guest of the club, Aaron Wagner, guest of the club, Delara Gladney, guest of Kendra Williams, Jamelia Frazier, guest of the club, Robin Webb Williams, guest of the club, Michael Carter, guest of Lisa, Sean Joyce, guest of Rusty Infinger, Ruby and Archie Calhoun, guest of Jane Dyer, William Childers, guest of Ryan Childers, and Curtis Sims, guest of Jane Dyer. Thank you all for joining us.
Good afternoon. I'm Penny. I am membership chair for this fiscal year, and we again have 4 fabulous Red Badgers we get to introduce today. And if you'll hold your applause till the end, that would be great. Also, remember that after the meeting, if you get a couple minutes, make sure you come up to this front table up here and introduce yourself so we can get to know our Red Badgers. They know they have 90 seconds. We're really busy today. So I will be holding the gun right here. So if you feel a touch on your arm, you know it's time to wrap it up. So I want to introduce, if you'll come up to my left, Ryan Childers, Lauren Martin, Brad Schneider, and Mark Elliott.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ryan Childers. I'm originally from El Centro, California, and don't get that confused with sexy California. This is out in the desert on the border with Mexico and Arizona. The county is roughly the size of Connecticut, and we've only got about 180,000 people there. Today is actually the 3rd anniversary of when we moved, and best decision I ever made in my life. I don't want to get political, but if you want to talk afterwards, I've only got 90 seconds. I can explain to you why we moved. In any event, I practiced law there for 17 years. When I moved here, I decided to retire from the practice of law. No offense, Justice, wherever you are, but that too is the best decision I made. And that was wonderful. And so I got here and I went back to Clemson, got a master's degree in real estate development. And so now I'm in the process of launching that next stage of my career. I know a Rotarian would never do this, but some men hit their 40s like I did, and they have a midlife crisis. They get a girlfriend and a sports car. I didn't do that. I just picked my family up, moved them across the country, and changed my profession. So my wife's thankful that I chose that route. My son, William, is here with me. He's job shadowing today, and he's been going to Rotary meetings since he was about 5 years old. I was a 17-year Rotarian where I was. Paul Harris, multiple Paul Harris, member of the Paul Harris Society, past president. Was also elected to the school board out there for 12 years. But I'm glad to be here, looking to make new friends and engage in the community here and begin to put my efforts here where I plan to live and hopefully be buried one day, many, many years from now. So thank you.
Sorry, I got short girl problems. Hey, everybody, I'm Lauren Marvin. I am the managing partner of Kenneth Rhodes and Associates Insurance Agency. We have 6 agencies throughout the upstate, and my office is in Williamston, South Carolina. But I am a guest, or I was invited to Rotary by Mr. Lonnie Decker, who is a good friend of mine. I am married to my husband, William, who just retired from BMW. We have 4 children, 9 grandchildren, and 1 fur dog named Bo. I have been in the insurance industry since 1987. I kind of like to think it was my calling. I don't have any degrees behind my name other than insurance agent extraordinaire. But anyway, I am involved in BNI, which is Business Networking International. I have been a president for the chapter, a vice president for the chapter. I was also a launch director for BNI. So I actually launched the chapter that I'm involved in right now, which is called Elite Networking. I am on the board of the Palmetto Business Association, which is in Anderson County. I also was the 2021, Woman of the Year for the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. I actually ran for that in honor of my grandson who passed away last February from leukemia. And I guess that's about it. Anything else you want to know about me? Come up and meet me.
I've got 90 seconds and I'm going to blow through that, I'm sure, because I can't do anything fast, it seems. Anyway, I'm Brad Schneider. I am from St. Charles, Illinois, which is about 735 miles, 13-hour drive. At least that's what it was in 1980 to 1984 when I drove from there to Greenville to go to Furman. I graduated from 1984 with a Bachelor's of Arts degree in Economics and Business Administration. And have primarily been in the banking world for most of my life. I did take a little deviation and went to the nonprofit world and then in the insurance business, but now I'm back into the other side of banking, which is working for a credit union. I work for South Carolina Federal Credit Union. We're a 90-year-old credit union out of Charleston. My role there is to develop the commercial lending platform for the upstate, primarily Greenville and Spartanburg. But I also have Columbia and Florence and Georgetown and North Myrtle Beach, and sometimes I dive into Charleston. So anyway, I've got a little bit of a territory there, which is great. I want to thank Stacy Lomanek, who's one of my LaMonaco, who is one of my teammates at South Carolina Federal, for getting me hooked up with the Downtown Greenville Rotary. I think that's exciting for me. I've always wanted to participate in some sort of a group, but I'm finally working for an employer that really promotes it, which is kind of nice. I have a family. I met my wife, Beth, at Furman back in the day. She kind of ruined my plan. I was going to come to Greenville from the cornfields of Illinois, burn a path through Greenville like Sherman did Atlanta, and then hightail it back home. And then I actually met my wife the first day of campus. First day I was on campus, I saw this cute little co-ed checking me out in a French placement exam, and the rest was history. So anyway, we've been married for 40 plus years. So I guess the plan worked out. It just wasn't exactly my original plan. All right. So I have 3 children. Brenna, College of Charleston graduate, pursuing her master's degree at Clemson right now. She'll be graduating in May. So we're going to have a tiger in the family, which is kind of freaky for me. My middle daughter, Brooke, went to University of Southern California. She is going to be going to NYU for graduate school this fall. If anybody knows of any scholarships, please let me know because she could use it. She's a fine artist living in Nashville and actually making a living. So I was a little worried she was going to be living under a bridge, but fortunately not. Then my son Bradley works for Ford up in Washington, D.C. in the marketing department. I guess his claim to fame is that he had an internship his junior year of college, did a whiteboard presentation to the chief marketing officer of Ford and the president of Lincoln. He actually blew it away because I was kind of sneaking listening to him behind the door. He didn't know I was there because we were all at home for COVID. and got offered a job with Ford his junior year in college, which was pretty cool. Looking forward to being a participant in anything education related with the Rotary Club, because my mom used to be a teacher, and also participating in the Kringle Holiday Village. And the only funny thing I'll say is that I appreciate Amy Randall's photo of me. She's got this exceptional age regression software, and it takes you back about 15 years and it makes you look a lot, in my case, less grayer, less fatter, less blinder, less older. So I just want to encourage you all to get her to take your picture. Thank you.
Hey, I'm Mark Elliott. I'm originally from Baltimore, Maryland. I was very good at math when I was younger, and when I decided to go to college, I was running the numbers, and I found a college that had a 10-to-1 ratio for girls to guys, so that's where I went. Stevenson University in Baltimore, Maryland. Ironically, I met my wife before that, so my plan didn't really come to fruition, so that's life. I run an affordable housing nonprofit in South Carolina called Opportunity South Carolina. So we own apartment complexes across the state, and we're using them for teachers, police, fire, and other folks that that need safe, affordable housing. I have a wife of 16 years. I have 2 beautiful children, two dogs. Kelly Byers is my sponsor. I'm not sure if she's here today, but she's been amazing. I'm very excited to join Rotary and experience the plethora of different activities that y'all work on to help the community and make this place better. I'm hoping that through some of the apartment complexes that we own, we can help some of those efforts around this area and around the state. So I'm looking forward to being here and working with you all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Remember, if you have any questions, come up and say hello. And don't forget, Thursday night is Thirsty Thursday. Great way to get to know these Red Badgers. Bring your sponsors. And it's a great time for everybody. Thanks. Bye.
So it's my privilege to introduce 3 very, very special guests today. So for those of you who are visiting, our clubs realize how challenging it is to be a teacher in public school today, and especially in a high poverty school, because they have so many other issues that revolve around not just teaching. It's a lot of issues at home and stuff. So we formed a partnership with Alexandria Elementary School, and every month we recognize the staff person and teacher of the month. And so today we're very privileged to have with us our teacher of the month is Brittany Choice. Brittany, will you please stand up? Brittany is a 5th grade math teacher. And Brittany has been in education for 10 years. This is her first year at Alexandria Elementary School. We also have a staff member of the month is Dr. Whitney Grant, who is the instructional coach. She's been in education for 22 years. And we're also fortunate to have the staff person of the month from February was not able to come last month. So she's able to come to today. So we have a K-5 assistant, Sherry Sweet. Sherry, if you'll please stand up. So yeah, she is an assistant to K-5, and she has been there for 7 years and will be returning next year, which is one of the few teachers that are coming back. For those of you who don't know, I read on Friday mornings to a kindergarten class, and she's in the class next door to mine. And those are the encourage you all to become involved at Alexandria Elementary School, because those are the cutest, sweetest kids on the face of the earth, besides my grandchild. Thank you.
Jane Dyer, where are you? Come up and join me. There you go. In 2020, the Rotary Club of St. Helena, California, heard from a guest speaker about 2 villages in Zimbabwe, Musakiwa and Mushaki, that were having a real crisis with the provision of fresh drinking water. Climate change had altered rainfall patterns in that part of Zimbabwe, and women in many cases were walking miles and miles to get water back to those villages, and frequently that water was contaminated. That Rotary Club decided to make a difference, and in one of those wonderful Rotary partnerships that we make effective in this organization, they partnered with the Rotary Club of Harare in Zimbabwe, on an $82,000 project. And listen to what this $82,000 project did. They dug 2 wells, put in place a solar-powered pump and piping system, and trained the local residents in how to maintain these clean water systems. And as a result of that, those 2 villages in Zimbabwe now have clean drinking water. And I tell you that story because what we are celebrating today is our Paul Harris Fellows, people in this club who have given money in support of the Rotary Foundation, or in some cases, even beyond the initial Paul Harris recognition level, and are receiving Paul Harris plus points. And those are the very kinds of projects that that money is going to support, a truly worthwhile effort. So I would like to invite a number of people up to join me here in recognition of their Paul Harris and Paul Harris plus recognition today. So Jessica Baker, Brett Caldwell is receiving a Paul Harris plus recognition. Brett, come on out. Roger Heitzig. Roger is being recognized as Paul Harris +2. Elizabeth Razor, I saw her. She's at my table. Another Paul Harris +2. Congratulations, Elizabeth. Fabian Unterzacher, is he here? Fabian is also a Paul Harris +2. And Scott Stevens, there he is. Paul Harris +4 for Scott. Lucy Henry, I saw Lucy. There she is. Also a Paul Harris +4. Scott Powell, come back up to the podium. Paul Harris +5 for Scott. And finally, the big winner today, Bert Strange. Come on up, Bert. Paul Harris +8. Oh. Thank you to all these folks, and thank you for your support continuing of the Rotary Foundation.
Paul Harris +8 simply means you've been around here a long time. So there. It is my pleasure today to introduce our speaker, is Dr. Tonya Matthews. You know the old saying about this, not just another pretty face. Well, this girl is not just another pretty face. She's an engineer. She's a graduate of Duke with degrees in biomedical and electrical engineering. At Duke, when they sing the Star Spangled Banner, it gets, well, never mind. That's another story. But she went on and did a PhD in biomedical engineering from Johns Hopkins. She has been, well, let me put it this way. On my phone, it takes about 5 flips to go through her, all of her stuff. But her claim to fame at the moment, after a long career in education and in a nonprofit, is that she is the president and CEO, or CEO and president, I'm not sure which way it goes, of the International African American Museum in Charleston. Folks, if you haven't been, you're wrong. You need to make a field trip. I had the privilege of being there earlier this month for a conference, and we had a little tour of the place. It will absolutely blow you away. Greenville's got some good museums, got some really good museums, but I was just absolutely floored by what is on the ground there at Gadsden's Wharf. If you don't know the history, I'm sure Dr. Matthews is going to talk about that a little bit. But it says at the bottom of all the stuff on the website, it doesn't matter what you're looking at. Down at the bottom, a little thing says, "Plan your visit." You need to do that. Let's welcome Dr. Tonya Matthews.
Oh, your check is in the mail, sir. In the mail. Well, thank you. I am very excited to be here. Ooh, okay. All right. I will stand in camera view. I was going to wander. I'm going to get just wide angle. So thank you. I'm excited to be here this morning, coming into the afternoon. This table over here, don't worry, I do well with words. So even though you can't see the screen, you'll see the screen. I'll make sure. And to our special guests who were acknowledged today for being in the trenches of our school system, thanks to each of you, my sisters. Just remind the babies that we are still possible. And that all works. For my red tag, Stevenson, I see you. I'm from Maryland, the DC area, so there are a lot of connections everywhere we go. I also want to acknowledge, we do not ever do these kinds of things alone. I have several of my team members in the room. I have Jamila and Robin. We even have a third team member that is out there making the way for the next stop that we have while we're here in Greenville. And so with that, I'm going to, I love it when technology works, sort of get started and provide sort of an introduction and overview of the International African American Museum, perhaps some magic behind the scenes for those who have visited the museum, and some encouragement for those if you have not yet visited the museum. The mission of the International African American Museum is to honor the untold stories of the African American journey at one of our nation's most sacred sites. That is a mouthful. You would think there was another poet in the room when that was written, but it has layers, and I'm going to start at the bottom of those layers. When we talk about one of our nation's most sacred sites, it's because we have what's called power of place at the International African American Museum. It was alluded that the space that we were built is actually very special, and that'll be the first thing I share with you, because when we think about this, we like to think about telling the story of the International African American Museum in three sets. The place has a story, the museum tells you a story, and then we invite you to find your own story. So first, there are a couple of things that we hope that you feel when you come to the International African American Museum and are there on site. So what do we mean by this place has a story? Well, the International African American Museum had the humbling privilege and responsibility of claiming the last undeveloped piece of land that was formerly Gadsden's Wharf. Gadsden's Wharf was the site of our nation's most prolific transatlantic slave trading port. And by prolific, we mean that historians will estimate that upwards of 40% of all enslaved Africans that came to what is now the United States would have come right through that port. Now, even though we are 100,000 square feet, we're a big one for a museum. The port itself stretched several blocks back to the Gilliard and was almost just as wide in order to be able to accommodate that level of traffic. And so that's what we mean by power of place. But there are two things that I always hope folks feel when they come to the museum. It's part of the way we guide and tell our story, which is we honor the power of this place, the power of this story, this period of enslavement that we must reckon with, that we must tell the stories. But the thing that you should feel that we honor, and it's one of the things that gave us our name, is that what we also honor is that this conversation about enslavement is neither the beginning nor the end of the African American journey. It's simply in the middle. And so we hope that you'll feel that, because our timeline goes all the way back to 300 BCE. And all the way up to 2020. Why 300 BCE? Because 300 BCE is the first known record of human rice cultivation on the continent of Africa. Now, of course, only South Carolinians get that reference, but you all understand the rice part. I'm actually from the Washington, D.C. area, and so part of my own discovery journey has been understanding how important rice and rice culture was in this space and the incredible contributions that the West Africans made to that. So that's the first thing, feeling that this is the middle of the story. The second thing, because folks ask all the time, what do you want people to feel when they come to the museum? And I'm not being cheeky when I say everything. Because we are trying to tell the whole story. And if you ask me, one of the greatest gifts of understanding the African American journey in its full context is the ability to begin to understand African Americans' ability to simultaneously hold the sensations of trauma and joy. Not trauma on, see, that's the Black folks making noise right now. Not trauma on Tuesday and joy on Thursday. It is constantly woven in there together. So there is no happy part of the museum or sad part of the museum. We're trying to tell every story in all of its pieces. So if you were ever going on a tour of the site with me, I would be the one that started my tours on the side of the building. So a couple of things. As you looked at the picture of the building, for the folks that are over here, you'll notice that our building is raised up on 18 13-foot pillars. Some of you have been to or through Charleston on a Tuesday, and you know it floods every other Tuesday. And we are right there on the water, Gadsden's Wharf. But that's not actually the story behind our design. When our architect began to speak with us and learned about the space, learned about Gadsden's Wharf, learned about what the stories the museum was asked to hold, he took on our language of this being hallowed ground. And out of that, he then decided that even the museum would not touch the ground. And that's actually why he lifted us up on that space. So when he did that, though, that created our first floor. So we have 60,000 square feet of outdoor space, the African Ancestors Memorial Garden. It's a garden within a garden design that the landscape architect, Walter Hood, designed for us. So on the side of the building is one of the places that embodies this intersection of trauma and joy. And so when we were doing the archaeological dig for the building, if something this size and scale, and we also knew the space, you do the dig first. We didn't find any remains or artifacts or even tools. But what we did find were architectural remnants of things that would have been at the site for it to have been an active slave trading port, right? Because you're basically almost talking about an industrial site. So one of the things we found were the architectural foundations of a storage house. Now, this is one of those moments where we had to gently reckon with the fact that at this time, we were not transporting people, we were importing livestock. And so you're going to have things like a storage house, right? So you're going to bring in the enslaved people and you're going to stick them in the storage house, maybe sort them, clean them, decide where they were going to go, maybe just keep them there for a while, waiting for the price to go up. And so what the historical record showed us is that one particularly cold low country winter, early 1800s, an unexpected chill came through the low country. At the same time, the market was really low. And there were individuals being held at Gadsden's Wharf waiting for their price to go up because it was too cheap to sell at the moment. Because of what we were doing in that space, what the records show that just over 700 individuals died in storage simply waiting for their price to go up, all over Gadsden's Wharf. So then we discover that our storage house is one of those storage houses. And so now we've got to figure out what to do, right? We are a history museum. We have access to the records. We could have recreated it as it was back then and turned that into that kind of experience. But we wanted to do something different. Again, we're trying to tell the entire story. So we worked with Walter to create a portion of what you see behind me. So if you're at this space, on the ground, there's a one-dimensional brick outline cutting through the grass. That one-dimensional brick outline is the outline of the foundations of the storage house. And that one-dimensional brick outline then seems to cut through two giant black granite walls that almost seem to part to allow the foundation to come through and wrap around those walls. Those two walls are parallel to each other, and the outside of the wall is very rough. The inside of the wall is polished so smoothly, you can actually see your reflection if you're standing in between those two walls. And in between those two walls, Walter hand-carved a series of hunched, kneeling figures, obviously representing those that we lost in that space. But if you look at those figures carefully enough, you will see they're facing the water. And as they get closer and closer to the water, they appear to be emerging out of the concrete. And then on the outside of the granite wall, we've inscribed Maya Angelou's poem, "And Still I Rise." So these are the kinds of things that we do in that museum to help embrace and understand the whole story. And so from there, you enter sort of the rest of our gardens space. It's really beautiful. We have sweetgrass to help explain to the Yankees where their baskets come from. And then and so we go all the way up to the water spaces as well, because we also have an infinity reflection pool at the edge of our property that has a pumping system that raises and lowers its water so that it's always in conversation with the tide as we sit right there at the Atlantic Ocean. Then you will come into the museum. Because of the design, you actually enter our building in the middle. We've got an east wing and a west wing. And this is one of the things that catches folks' attention. It's the first thing you see when you walk in. This is the Atlantic Experiences Gallery. It's 8 13-foot screens that are rapidly sort of changing pictures. Some are still, some are little movie snippets. They run the full gambit of the timeline of the museum. So we've got everything from Timbuktu to Serena Williams whipping up on folk. So this is the full journey that we're talking. And one of the interesting things about running a museum is you build it and hallelujah, they will come. But then you discover how people actually act in the space. This was initially just intended as an introduction. We wanted to make people comfortable. Listen, there'll be a lot in here. There's going to be something you can relate to, some things you'll learn, some things you already know. So it was designed to give ambiance. What we discovered is what it does is it creates a choke point because people will stand in front like it's a movie. And they'll sit there and they love the pictures, and heaven forbid the picture that they wanted to take a picture of flash by, because they will stand there and wait till it rotates again. The film is 27 minutes long. So we have had to think that, but it's wonderful when we find these sticky places inside the museum that really help to resonate. In addition to this, we have 8 additional galleries in our core exhibitions. So the East Wing, the wing that faces the Atlantic Ocean, is organized culturally and geographically. Sure, there are times and dates inside, but the organization is really to introduce the rest of the international in the International African American Museum. So by international, we mean origin stories. So we do talk about where folks have come from on the coast of West Africa, but it's also modern connections to the African diaspora. It's why if you go to Barbados, you will think you are in Mount Pleasant, South Carolina, because folks sound the same, cook the same, almost walk the same, and dress the same. It is why, frankly, members of the diaspora all over the world recognize a beat. Okay, and we can all sort of dance in that space. But it's also the source of a lot of things that we consider Southern culture. The influx and the impact of West Africans, African Americans, the African diaspora that were here in this space are responsible for a lot of things that we now simply consider Southern. One of my favorite examples, when we're in the Gullah Geechee Gallery, yes, we have an entire gallery dedicated to telling the story of the Gullah Geechee people. Now, I would argue that every American History Museum should have a little bit of Gullah, but here at the International African American Museum, we can do the foundations. And so we talk about the food, right? We talk the rice, the shrimp and grits, the spices, and all those kinds of things. And I like to remind folks, we are a British colony. When was the last time you complimented porridge? Exactly. If it tastes good, it was probably us. And so in this space, we're talking about these food and culture and in that space. And then we talk about the Carolina Gold Gallery. So we talk about the rice. That's the gallery where we do get into the inhumanity of the institution of slavery, but we do it without losing sight of the humanity of those who were enslaved. So when you're looking at the South Wall, it's all big numbers, big institutions, it's industry, it's satellite view. It's talking about how at one point in time, South Carolina rivaled China as the #1 global rice exporter in the world because we began enslaving West Africans who already knew how to grow rice. And they catapulted us to the top. So we talk about that in very, very big pictures, but sometimes that's hard to take that all in. So if you're looking at the south wall, we have names. We have 4 or 5 names and their stories. We were able to go to the archives of the Federal Writers Project, and they did oral history projects with formerly enslaved people, and they asked them to tell their story. And so we have that in that space. So sometimes it's a big picture, it's millions, it's satellite views, and sometimes it's a single grandmother telling the story. And this is how we help people through this story. Then we go through the Carolina Connections Gallery, because in case you haven't already picked it up, all roads lead to South Carolina. And so even though we are a national museum with an international lean, we root a lot of our storytelling in South Carolina because we are so fundamental to the story. When you cross over then to the west wing of the museum, then you're in our chronologically organized section of the museum. We go from 1400, it's a U-shaped gallery, all the way up to modern times. And that's also the side of the gallery that is pre-labeled and pre-sectioned as we prepare to support school groups. So some of you all might remember middle and elementary school, but there are different times when you study different things. Different times you'll study South Carolina history or American history or global history. And so because we are the International African American Museum, we can do all those labels. And so we're expecting that. And we've got visual clues to help folks go through. We are a what we call selectively collecting museum, which means that 98% of our collection is on view. If you know anything about museums, it's usually the opposite. It's usually 98% is in storage. Just give me a second. They got a head start. So we've got over 700 objects, art, artifacts, and our collection is also global. We focus here in the Low Country, West African continent, but also the diaspora from Brazil to the UK, and you'll see that. And so we will have vessels that come from so 17th, 18th century African diaspora communities, and we also have a Mardi Gras king costume that was made 3 years ago. So we're trying to show folks the connections. Now, one of the interesting things is, what is the root of the chronological gallery, right? So the space had the story. You're in all the museum galleries. We're telling you a whole bunch of stories, hoping you pick your favorite one to tell. But the West Wing is anchored by the Center for Family History. This is our genealogy center. So we have dedicated a very large footprint of our facility to a world-class genealogy center. We are connected to some of the largest genealogy databases in the world. And we have genealogists and genealogy researchers right there on staff. So you can come in, whether or not you're a beginner and you've just signed up for all this stuff, you're curious, everyone's talking about it, or whether or not you figure out that this is the year you're going to get your money's worth out of Ancestry.com and you would like for us to inspire you. We also have classes in the space, and we also have a story booth. So that folks hopefully will have an intergenerational conversation in the story booth, and then you can send the video and audio to you, and you can also give us permission to keep your story in our archives and collections at the museum. If you know anything about museums, you know that space is always a priority. And there is never enough space inside a museum. So you might ask why we would carve out such a large footprint for a genealogy center. And that is in response to this whole part of we each have our own story to tell inside of these bigger stories. And arguably and obviously, the African-American story is interrupted by this period of slavery and enslavement. It's about record keeping. Right. And so one of the things that used to be thought that African Americans couldn't get much farther than the 1860s, maybe 1850s, depending. There is something called the Wall of 1870, because it wasn't until then that we were even recorded by name in the US Census, right? But what we have discovered, it wasn't impossible, it's just very difficult. And so modern thinking looks at these records and ways of record keeping in different ways. And in a space like this, we can tackle and use some of the records that would be more sensitive, or take some approaches that more blatantly consider what we were and what we were doing at that time. One of my favorite examples is military records, right? So African Americans have fought in every armed conflict our nation has ever participated in, even in the founding of the country. Rest assured, no matter what else is going on, the military knows who you are. and keeps exceptional records in order to be able to find you. And so as we teach folks how to use those records, one of the interesting things are pension records. So of course, there was a time when African Americans who were put through, let's say, an incredible amount of rigor when it came to getting your pension. There were a lot of questions, right? This is how racism works. This is how bias works. You know, where have you been? What have you been doing? What's your mama doing? What's your wife doing? How many times have you moved? How many kids do you have? Can you prove that you live there? And on and on and on and on, having to prove and prove and prove that they served and that they were who they said they were. Now, as difficult and challenging as that is, what that has done, though, it has turned African-American pension records from certain periods in our nation's history into mini biographies because of all of the work that they had to do. And so when you're a genealogy center and you're trying to connect people to the fullness of their story, you get a whole lot more than name, date, and serial number. Right. And so it's being in a space like this that can embrace those kinds of times and those kind of issues candidly is why we decided to devote this kind of space. But the nice thing is, once you do the hard stuff, the easy stuff is done. So a genealogy center, because everybody got a great grand. And so we actually do genealogy for everyone, regardless of background, with a particular interest in American genealogy, because again, we are all going to have to get through that period if we have been here for a couple of generations. But our philosophy is it's neither the beginning nor the end. It's the middle of our journey. And I'll close with this shot and one more, something we're really, really proud of. So some of you may know that Charleston and Barbados have a really, really close relationship. And that's because Barbados was the island farthest out into the Atlantic Ocean. So as the British ships were coming in this direction, they would stop at Barbados. That was always the first stop. And then the ships would spread out from there, going down to South America, up to North America. Charleston was essentially Charlestown, right? It was almost a colony of a colony. Even I think first 2 out of our 3 or 4 governors were actually British appointees that came into that space. And so that meant that that's where the ships would stop first, and then they would come this way. Because of the location of our genealogy center, we have access to the Low Country plantation records, many of them, right? And so many of that is going to include ship manifests. So we are the port of arrival. So we know the ships that came here and potentially where some of those enslaved people were sent to. Barbados has the other side of that collection because the ships stopped there. And two and a half years ago, when Barbados became an independent parliamentary republic, they got control of all of the remaining state archives on the island, which included 40 million pages of original documentation on the British Barbados slave trade. So they have the other half. So imagine if we can get the manifest from the ship here, figure out where it stopped at Barbados. Barbados is the one that has the manifest of where they came from on the continent in the first place. So we're really, really excited about that. Now, granted, this is exactly what they look like. So it's going to be a second as folks are working to preserve and digitize, but that actually starts this spring. And so that's pretty much it for the introduction to the museum. I think I am relatively on time here and can take some questions. But as was pointed out, you can go to our lovely website and you can find the button that says visit now, plan your visit. You can also find the donate button. I'm just, you know, because my development team is here. And also that I would like to thank folks who have already been to the museum. In January, we reached our 100,000th visitor for the museum. And for those of you keeping track, we only opened up in June 27th of this past summer. So we are very excited. So come on in and be part of the 250,000th visiting group. Thank you. That's a good question. So the question was, a museum that tells the stories that we tell in a time like this, when folks are arguing about telling Black history, Black stories. So here's at least one trick. So one, go to the museum, right? You go to the museum because then you'll have an experience, right? And you'll have your own experience. And one of the things that's very hard to argue with is lived experiences. And I think one of the things that I really, really hear in a lot of these arguments isn't as much anger and hatred as it is fear. right? Afraid of going in and embracing these stories and having things shouted at you. The number one concern from African Americans is that we wouldn't be able to tell the truth. The number one concern from majority Americans was they were going to get yelled at. And then there were folks who were like, but I'm ready, yell at me. It was terrible. No, that is not how I get members of the museum. And one of the things that we have found is when we centralize the stories and when we centralize this in context, and there is no yelling and there is no screaming, there's no pointing, there is accountability, there is truth telling, there is some hard stuff in there, but the experience is very, very different. And so what I have done is I have actually watched my non-Black patrons and how they go through the space, right? We have a very, very diverse audience, and it's really interesting. The first thing is shock and amazement that no one's yelling. And then the second thing is a sense of awe of, I didn't know. I didn't know. And folks get really curious. The one problem that we had with the onslaught, in a good way, of visitors was that we literally could not keep books stocked in the bookstore. And we had to set up a partnership with the local independent bookseller in downtown Charleston just to be able to keep up, right? And so part of it is simply being able to say, not just from a do the right thing or I know we must standpoint, but to say, well, listen, I was there. And it just wasn't like that for me. Like, you should really go and check it out. Or maybe we can go together or sort of something like that, because there is something about who is telling the story. And there are times when my voice will be the most powerful, but often it's about who we know, and that one-on-one kind of conversation. And at this point, I'm at the point where if we have to do this one person at a time, let's just buckle up, grab a snack, get it done. Thank you. Last question. Yes. So that is an excellent question. And it's one of the really interesting and powerful things about the genealogy that we're having in the session, is that it is very personal. People know it's personal because it's your story, but when you're in there, it gets really personal, right? In that space. But what we have actually found is that it's one of the best examples of the intersection and the interweaving of any kind of sort of trauma and joy. I like to sometimes joke with folks. Folks think you worried about dipping into this period of slavery. Let me tell you about your uncle. And so, as we have those conversations and those stories, but the truth of the matter is there are records, there are stories. One of the things we also teach folks how to do is how to honor the stories that your family has passed down. A lot of times we dismiss a story because we find a single fact is not accurate, right? Because memory sort of does that. But there are ways to sort of cross-reference and think through things. I remember when we were doing some of my own family genealogy, my mother kept telling me about her grandfather, and I knew that couldn't be right because her grandfather was dead by the time she was born. I said, this is not possible, but she swore. Now, I am of an age and my mother's of an age where I'm ready to tell my mother she is wrong. But they are teaching me sort of those new and different things. And what we ultimately discovered is that her grandfather and her great-grandfather had the same name, right? He was a junior, he was a second. And it wasn't that the grandfather had died so early, it was that the great-grandfather had lived to be 107. So that meant that he was alive and was there in the home and in the space when she was a little girl. And so part of it is also sort of learning how to dig and learning how to hear and tell those stories. The other thing we find out when we can't get sort of to the exact names or date or spaces, something very interesting happens with familiarity, right? Which is you may be looking for a particular neighborhood, but you will find something else that's very, very familiar. Well, that's the way that we cook our shrimp and grits, or that's exactly how my mama used to season or do this, or I remember a similar story. And so part of the knowing who we are, sometimes it's exact direct lineage, and sometimes it's connections to those bigger pictures. But it does take time, and it is a rabbit hole. And so folks will enjoy. Thank you all very, very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Matthews, for that engaging talk. We also need to thank Fabian and the Westin Hotel for sponsoring our speaker today. They provided, I trust, very nice accommodations for you coming from the Low Country. Please remember to pass the cart bucket. I don't recall who's matching this month. Does anybody know out there? It's you, Jane? Okay. Then everybody who wants to make Jane pay a lot of money, dump your money in the bucket and she'll match it. Okay. Okay. Okay, and we have our upcoming events. Let's see. Please register for Casino Night coming up. Law Enforcement Appreciation Day, which will be on April 9th, April 4th, I think was mentioned by Penny as Thirsty Thursday. And anybody who doesn't know about Casino Night, because they're a guest here today and they have not heard about it, Jenny will be emailing information to all the guests. Roger, do you want to throw anything in real quick about it? All right. Okay, please stand for our four-way test. Okay, of the things we think, say, or do, is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned? Meeting adjourned.